This lesson is on voters and voting behavior. How have voting rights changed over time in the United States? Initially, the right to vote in America was limited to white male property owners. Today, the size of the American electorate is greater than 200 million people. Nearly all citizens at least 18 years of age can qualify to vote. During the early 1800s, religious, property, and tax payment qualifications were gradually eliminated. In 1870, the 15th Amendment was intended to end race-based voting requirements. In 1920, the 19th Amendment prohibited the denial of the right to vote because of sex. In 1961, the 23rd Amendment granted citizens of the District of Columbia the right to vote for presidential electors. In 1964, the 24th Amendment eliminated the poll tax. In 1965, the Voting Rights Act guaranteed the right to vote for minorities. In 1971, the 26th Amendment lowered the voting age to 18. What constitutional restrictions exist on the state's power to set voting qualifications? Any person whom a state allows to vote for members of the most numerous branch of its own legislature must be also allowed to vote for members of Congress. No state can deprive any person the right to vote on account of race, color, or previous condition of servitude. No state can deprive any person the right to vote on account of sex. No state can require the payment of any tax as a condition for voting. No state can deprive any person who is at least 18 years of age the right to vote. What are the universal requirements for voting in the United States? There are 3 factors that states require people to meet to be eligible to vote. The first is citizenship. Most states require United States citizenship in order to vote. Residence. One must be a legal resident of a state to vote in elections. Most states require residency for minimum amounts of time in order to vote in the state. Age. The 26th Amendment requires that no state set a minimum voting age above 18. What other requirements have states used or are still using as voter qualifications? All states, except North Dakota, require citizens to register to vote. Registration is a procedure of voter identification intended to prevent fraudulent voting. Literacy. A person's ability to read or write is no longer required in any state to vote, but had been by several states at times in our nation's history. At one time, poll taxes, or special tax payment required to vote, were prevalent in the South. Poll taxes are now forbidden by the 24th Amendment. States also have restrictions on the right to vote on certain members of the population, such as those found to be mentally incompetent or people convicted of serious crimes. Political participation and awareness in America. Percentage of Americans who, from top to bottom, care who won the presidential election is at the highest. Watch the campaign on television. Care who won the congressional election. Approve of the way Congress has been handling its job. Think government officials are honest. Think people have a say in what the government does. Trust the federal government most of the time. Read magazine articles on the campaign. Were contacted by either major party. Gave money to a campaign. Wore a button or put a sticker on their car in the last election. And at the bottom, worked for a party or a candidate in the last election. How significant was early civil rights legislation passed in 1957, 1960, and 1964? The Civil Rights Act of 1957 created the United States Civil Rights Commission, investigated and reported voter discrimination, and gave the Attorney General the power to require federal courts to issue orders to prevent any interference with a person's right to vote. The Civil Rights Act of 1960 created federal voting referees who helped correct conditions to prevent voter discrimination. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 abolished the use of voter registration or a literacy requirement to discriminate against any voter. Its enforcement relied on judicial action and the use of injunctions. These are court orders that either force or restrain specific acts. What are the provisions and effects of the Voting Rights Act of 1965? The Voting Rights Act of 1965 led to the abolishment of the poll tax and outlawed the use of any kind of literacy test. African Americans at the polls. From 1960 to 1970, the number of registered African Americans increased from about 1.5 million to almost 3.5 million in a span of 10 years. What is the non-voting problem and what is its scope? Millions of Americans do not vote when elections are held. Voter turnout significantly decreases in off-year elections. These are congressional elections held in years when there is no presidential election. Why do people not vote? Some people cannot vote for various reasons, such as physical or mental illness, unexpected travel, and resident and alien citizenship status. However, most non-voters do not vote because they do not believe that their vote will make a difference. Also, they distrust politics and the political candidates. How can we compare the behaviors of voters and non-voters? Voting is studied more than any other form of political participation. We learn about voting behavior from the results of elections. Information can be gained by studying the results of confidential voting compared to the population makeup of a particular sector. The field of survey research. Data can be gathered by conducting polls across specific sections of the population, as the Gallup organization does. Studies of political socialization. Studying political socialization, the process by which people gain their political attitudes and opinions, can also be used in predicting voting behavior. What are the sociological and physiological factors that affect voting? Voter preferences can't be predicted by just one sociological factor. Voter opinion is a combination of income, occupation, education, gender, age, religious and ethnic background, geography, family, and other groups. Voters' perceptions of their party, the candidates, and the issues significantly affects their voting. Party identification and the loyalty of the party of the people to a particular party is the single most significant and lasting predictor of how a person will vote. Candidates and issues are two short-term factors that can influence even the most loyal Democrat or Republican. People may vote out of their chosen party if they dislike a candidate or the party stand on a particular issue.